President Trump tried to bully his closest ally into submission, unleashing a barrage of tariffs designed to bring Canada to its knees. But his maximum pressure campaign was met with a stunningly cool and calculated defiance from new Prime Minister Mark Carney. As Trump's strategy descended into chaos, culminating in what sources called a deranged letter, the president was left stunned and his entire plan in ruins. It was a political meltdown played out on the world stage. How did a leader's calm refusal to be intimidated cause a superpower's strategy to completely backfire? For over a century, the relationship between the United States and Canada was the global standard for international partnership. It wasn't just a trade agreement. It was a deeply intertwined economic and cultural alliance built on a foundation of shared values and mutual trust. The 49th parallel was less a border and more a seam, connecting two nations whose fortunes rose and fell together. From energy grids to automotive manufacturing, their economies were woven into a single continental fabric, a model of stability in a volatile world. But this historic foundation began to fracture under the seismic pressure of America First nationalism. The Trump administration reframed the relationship from one of partnership to one of predation, arguing that Canada had taken advantage of American generosity for decades. The language of diplomacy was replaced by the language of the deal, and trust was replaced by suspicion. The first major blow landed on March 4, 2025, when President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods, justifying it as a necessary tool to force concessions on unrelated issues like immigration and drug trafficking. Canada immediately fired back with billions in retaliatory tariffs. The era of friendly cooperation was over. The stage was now set for a new kind of leader and a new, more defiant chapter in the standoff. President Trump's strategy was one of overwhelming force, designed to shock the system. On March 4, 2025, his administration unleashed a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods, a move intended to bring Ottawa to the negotiating table. But when Canada refused to immediately capitulate, Trump didn't reconsider his strategy. He escalated it. His administration began playing what the Financial Times would later call a chaotic tariff roulette. The tariff threats became a constantly shifting series of demands and deadlines, creating maximum uncertainty. This wasn't a surgical policy, it was a scattergun blast. By August 1st, the White House had unleashed tariffs on 66 to 69 nations worldwide, culminating in a threat to raise the duties on Canada to a staggering 35%. The goal was to isolate Canada to make it feel the full weight of American economic power and to force a surrender. The pressure campaign reached a bizarre and personal climax. As the deadline loomed, President Trump sent a private letter to Prime Minister Carney. According to sources who described the document, it was an emotional, highly unusual communication. Marked by phrases written in all capital letters, the letter was seen by many in diplomatic circles as a deranged ultimatum, demanding that Canada move its production to the United States or face the full force of the 35% tariffs. It was a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the president's frustration. His strategy of intimidation wasn't working, and instead of recalibrating, he was simply turning up the volume. This was the ultimate expression of his worldview, that any problem could be solved and any opponent broken if you just applied enough brute force. It was a theory that was about to be spectacularly disproven. In Ottawa, the chaos emanating from Washington was met with a radical and unexpected response: calm. Mark Carney, Canada's new Prime Minister and a seasoned global financier, refused to be drawn into Trump's emotional vortex. He understood something fundamental about the conflict. The person who loses control loses the game. When the 35% tariff hike was announced, Carney didn't issue a fiery rebuttal. Instead, he simply expressed his disappointment and calmly stated that Canada would continue its long-term strategy of diversifying its economy away from the United States. It was a masterclass in political understatement, a quiet refusal to acknowledge the crisis Trump was trying to manufacture. His public message was consistent and clear. Canada would not be rushed by artificial deadlines, and as he famously stated, he would only engage in talks when it makes sense. Carney's cool demeanor was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of confidence, backed by a powerful and inconvenient fact that the White House seemed to have overlooked. The very USMCA trade deal that Trump had championed contained the antidote to his own tariff poison. Because of the treaty's rules, somewhere between 95% and 100% of all Canadian exports, particularly in critical sectors like energy, were legally exempt from these kinds of unilateral tariffs. Carney knew that Trump's biggest weapon was mostly a blank. Armed with this knowledge, he could afford to be patient. Behind the scenes, his negotiating team in Washington was so dismayed by the erratic and unpredictable nature of the Trump administration that they seriously considered walking away from the talks altogether. Canada's strategy was clear. Don't react to the noise, absorb the limited hit, and let the chaos in Washington consume itself. The result was a stunning political miscalculation that left President Trump in a state of meltdown. His attempt to corner Canada had failed. The August 1st deadline arrived, and with no deal in sight, the tariffs on the rest of the world kicked in, sending global stock markets into a nosedive. The Dow and S&P 500 plunged, partly fueled by the instability Trump himself had created. He was now politically trapped. His pressure campaign had backfired. His threats had been exposed as hollow, and his opponent had refused to even acknowledge the fight. The cool, calculated strategy from Ottawa had left the American president looking erratic, emotional, and ultimately outmaneuvered. He had started a brawl, but his opponent simply refused to show up. While Prime Minister Carney's strategy was a resounding political success, it did not grant Canada immunity from economic pain. The small percentage of trade left unprotected by the USMCA was still worth billions of dollars, and those industries felt the full force of Trump's tariffs. Nowhere was this more true than in Canada's iconic softwood lumber sector. For generations, this industry has been the lifeblood of rural communities, particularly in British Columbia and Quebec. When the tariffs hit, these mills and the towns they support were once again on the front lines of the trade war. Faced with a massive new cost, many were forced to cut back production or risk closing down altogether, threatening thousands of jobs. To cushion the blow, the Canadian government stepped in with a 1.2 billion Canadian dollar aid package, a crucial lifeline designed to help the industry survive and find new markets. But it was also a stark reminder of the real-world cost of the conflict, taxpayer dollars being spent to defend against an economic attack from a supposed friend. Beyond the direct impact on specific sectors, the relentless chaos from Washington had a corrosive effect on the broader Canadian economy. Business confidence began to erode. How could a company make a 5-year investment plan when the rules of trade with its largest partner could be upended by a single tweet? The chaotic tariff roulette created a chilling effect, causing some businesses to delay investments and hiring. While Carney's cool defiance was celebrated by the public, the business community paying the price felt the immense strain of the standoff. It was a necessary fight for economic sovereignty, but it was a fight that left deep scars. For the United States, the blowback from its own chaotic strategy was swift and brutal. The August 1st tariff escalation, intended to be the final blow against Canada, instead ignited a global firestorm that torched American markets. As tariffs on dozens of countries took effect, investors panicked. The Dow Jones and S&P 500 suffered a massive drop, one of the worst of the year, wiping out billions of dollars in American wealth. The plunge was amplified by disappointing U.S. jobs data, a sign that the trade uncertainty was already beginning to damage the domestic economy. The very policy meant to project American strength had instead exposed its vulnerability, shaking confidence in the stability of the U.S. market. This wasn't just a problem for Wall Street. The retaliatory tariffs Canada had imposed months earlier continued to inflict targeted pain across the American heartland. US farmers, manufacturers, and small business owners were paying the price for a trade war they didn't start. More damaging, however, was the collapse of America's reputation as a reliable partner. Businesses thrive on predictability. The Trump administration's erratic approach made it impossible for companies to plan for the future, leading many to question the wisdom of investing in a country whose trade policy was so volatile. The attempt to bully Canada had sent a message to the entire world. The United States was no longer a stable anchor of the global economy, but a source of chaos. A president's political meltdown, triggered by a prime minister's cool defiance, has left the world's most successful partnership in ruins. The strategy of maximum pressure backfired, exposing the limits of economic bullying and shaking faith in American leadership. The old certainties are gone, and while Canada may have won the battle of wills, both nations are now left to navigate the wreckage of a broken trust. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.